The disappearance of Gabby Petito caught fire throughout social media in the days following the announcement that she had gone missing under very suspicious circumstances.
This is the disappearance of 22-year-old Gabby Petito, who was just reported missing a few days ago after she seemingly vanished while road tripping across the country with her boyfriend.
Concerned citizens flocked to search for Gabby and demand answers from Brian Laundrie and his family. Answers that they were categorically refusing to give. But it wasn't just the fact that the Laundries weren't talking, because all anyone knew was that Brian had stranded Gabby in the middle of a national park without her phone, without her vehicle, or any money at all. And all of this would be compounded by the discovery in recent weeks that Brian's parents knew exactly what their son had done to Gabby all along.
Chris and Roberta Laundries said they talked to Brian after Petito was reported missing, but we've heard virtually nothing about what was discussed until now.
That they had intentionally shielded Brian from law enforcement or any semblance of accountability whatsoever. But it wouldn't be long before the distressing missing persons case would transform into a devastating homicide, with the attention of the media and millions of concerned onlookers shifting their focus onto bringing Brian Laundrie to justice. But just as law enforcement moved in to arrest Laundrie for his crimes, their efforts would be stifled due to the aid of a dubious criminal defense lawyer.
It's an interview with your client on the following Wednesday.
No,
that's what they told us today. That's what they told us today.
Play the clip you just played, and let's listen again where he says, "I do not know." Because that's what he says, Ed.
I'm telling you.
Despite the enormity of this tragedy, new information has arisen revealing previously unknown evidence in Gabby's case. Evidence that has exposed a far more sinister plot by the family of Brian Laundrie to deceive law enforcement, the Petito family, and a concerted effort to deny them the justice they so richly deserve. Leaving a question that I would like for each of you to consider in the following episode. Should Christopher and Roberta Laundrie be arrested for their involvement in protecting their son and aiding his efforts to avoid prosecution? But no matter how you answer that question, the story of Gabby Petito is far more than a tragedy that dominated the media cycle in late 2021. Her case has helped to shine a light into the dark recesses of domestic violence for untold people facing very similar circumstances, helping to unveil a more ominous problem that has taken root deep within our society, a metastatic cancer that we can no longer afford to ignore. In today's video, we will revisit the life of a beautiful young woman living her dreams, pursuing her passions, a woman whose life was robbed, denied to her by a boy who was never taught what it truly means to be a man. But this will be far more than a simple recitation of the facts, because hidden behind the evidence of what transpired between Gabby and the cowardice of Brian Laundrie is a story that we must address. A story that can no longer go untold. This is Hiding in Plain Sight, a wolf in sheep's clothing. The Gabby Petito Story, Episode 1. In the weeks following the aftermath of the massive media frenzy surrounding Gabby's case, her family bravely forged a new path ahead, creating the Gabby Petito Foundation. Their foundation has done truly remarkable work to raise awareness about domestic violence and other related issues, and it's why I have made this video a fundraiser for their organization. Additionally, I will be donating the proceeds from this video to the foundation to help their ongoing efforts as they continue to bring awareness and help save lives every single day. I want to thank the Petito family for all they continue to do to honor the memory of Gabby and to help countless others find their way to safety. And if you or someone you know needs help, please don't wait. Reach out and talk to someone today. And finally, this episode will include brief discussions about sensitive issues, including domestic violence, as well as other related subjects that may be difficult for some viewers to watch. Therefore, viewer discretion is advised. No one ever goes into a relationship thinking to themselves that they will become a victim of domestic violence. But by the time that you realize it's happening to you, most people are already caught within the grasp of the cycle of abuse. Easily, one of the most insidious elements of that cycle is the reality that shame, embarrassment, coupled with the mental and emotional trauma, often dissuades action from the very people that need the most help and support. Far too often, victims are unaware of the signs of abuse and how to properly identify them, which in turn allows for the abuse to continue unabated. With the benefit of hindsight, many documentaries covering Gabby's case have identified the clear signs that she was a victim of that very cycle. But in order to properly understand everything that transpired, I would first like to revisit the overall timeline of what happened in Gabby's case. Because even more than the crime that was perpetrated against Gabby, as much as possible, I want to know who she was and the life she lived. So without further ado, let's begin. Gabrielle Venora Petito was born in the spring of 1999 and eventually found her place in a mixed family of 6 younger siblings and half-siblings. In all of the statements that have ever been made about Gabby from everyone who knew her, each has spoken of her the same exact way, saying that she was passionate, vibrant, deeply kind, and incredibly intelligent young woman who loved fiercely and lived with compassion through her actions. In fact, at the age of 14, Gabby participated in a music video that was designed to raise awareness about the issue of gun violence in America. Even at that age, it seems evident that she was trying to make a difference in the world around her, leaving her indelible mark on everyone and anyone she could. Gabby would go on to attend Bayport Blue Point High School, the same high school that her future fiancé, Brian Laundries, also attended. In 2017, Gabby graduated from high school, and in September of that same year, she relocated to Carolina Beach, North Carolina, where she worked in a local restaurant as a waitress. Gabby and Brian's relationship would begin just 2 years later in March of 2019, wherein just a short time after she would make the decision to move in with Brian and his parents in their North Point, Florida home. Having relocated several states away, Gabby began a new career as a pharmacy technician, working out of a local Publix grocery store close to their home in North Point. But less than a year later, the pandemic swept through the United States, and just a short time after that, Gabby resigned her position. Later that year and into 2020, Gabby and Brian would embark on their first cross-country trip from the east coast of New York to the shores of the Pacific in California. By June of 2020, the two were engaged to be married, and by December, Gabby purchased a white Ford van that she would transform into a camper that would allow her to freely roam the country and to pursue her dreams. But it wouldn't be until the following year, in the summer of 2021, that Gabby and Brian embarked on their first lengthy road trip. On June 2nd, they left Florida in Gabby's white van and began their multi-state visit to several well-known national parks. Several weeks ago, I spoke with a representative of the Gabby Petito Foundation. We discussed some important parts of her case, but what struck me the most about that conversation was what I learned about Gabby. In all of the documentaries that I've seen of her, many of them portray her as this up-and-coming, dedicated social media influencer. But in that conversation, I learned that nothing could be further from the truth about who she really was. More than anything, she was a sister, a daughter, and someone who loved her family and friends dearly. And while she certainly had aspirations, those that knew her also knew that she was so much more than an influencer focused on fame or self-ambition. After that conversation, I began to listen to the various interviews that had been conducted by those who knew Gabby closely. And that's when I stumbled onto the interview with Gabby's best friend, Rose Davis. What I learned in that interview revealed that the early signs that something was very wrong in Gabby's relationship with Brian was something that had been evident from the very beginning. In this clip, we hear Rose retelling the story of how she and Gabby became inseparably close from the earliest days of their friendship. Listen closely.
You seem so cool. I want to be your friend. Can we be friends? And I was like, of course. And from there, we started hanging out every day. And it's kind of weird to say I met her on Bumble for Friends. People always laughed at us for that. But hey, glad she came into my life.
The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence is one of the preeminent organizations helping to combat the increase of reported incidences in DV cases. On their website, they share the primary warning signs of an abuser, just some of which are included in the following. Number 1, if your partner demonstrates extreme jealousy. 2, if they are possessive or controlling, also referred to as coercive control. Number 3, if that person is regularly unpredictable. 4, they demonstrate an ongoing irregularity with their mood and are known to have a bad temper. Number 5 is important. The website explains that an abuser may be pleasant and charming between periods of violence, explaining that they are commonly viewed as a nice person to others outside of the relationship. And number 6 is equally important. It indicates that violence isn't always physical. In fact, in some relationships, it can take months or even years before the cycle of abuse progresses from emotional to physical acts. Now, it's so important to remember that these are just some of the warning signs of an abusive relationship. But let's see if any of these become apparent in the way that Rose describes her observations of Gabby's relationship with Brian Laundrie.
On the outside, he's very charismatic, so it seems very loving, and there's no doubt in my mind that she loves him, and I know that, and from how I've always seen it, he loves her. Like any relationship, there was arguments, and she come stay at my house when there was arguments just to get away from it.
Easily one of the most destructive elements of a relationship caught in the vicious cycle of domestic violence stems from just one single word: shame. Shame can transform into fear, the fear that our friends, our loved ones, even our family might find out what this person has done. That fear and shame can be crippling and so often prevents people from speaking out. But the more that I listened to Rose speak, the more I realized that the picture of what was really happening between Brian and Gabby was about to come into focus.
I couldn't give a number, but I mean, within the first year, I want to say at least 7 to 10 times.
Gabby's best friend Rose has just told us that within the first year of her relationship with Brian, that she came over to Rose's house 7 to 10 times to sleep on her couch. She explains in this interview that Gabby did this because of the nature of the fights she was having with Brian, because they were that severe. And this is exactly why we need to normalize discussions about this issue, because so often victims don't even know how to ask for help. But in this interview, Rose was about to describe in more detail just one of the more explosive arguments Gabby endured during this same period of time.
Well, we were supposed to go line dancing. It was ladies' night. And halfway there, she realized her ID was missing. And so it caused a really big argument because Brian just didn't want her to go out. It was a jealousy issue. It caused a huge argument between them. And
okay, so let's recap. Brian Laundrie knows that Gabby wants to go out for a girls' night with her girlfriends to go line dancing, which, by the way, is a completely healthy and normal thing for anyone to do. But his petulant, infantile response is to steal her ID, effectively preventing her from being able to go out at all. Do you remember the warning signs we just talked about? Because Brian Laundrie's behavior is the definition of abuse and domestic violence. And to be clear, your partner does not need to physically hit you to be violent. Because now that we hear these words, it's so clear that Gabby was enduring this cycle of abuse from the very beginning of their relationship. And what's sad is that far too often shame, embarrassment, and a desire to protect the abuser often prevents the victim from ever coming forward to tell their loved ones what's actually happening at home. And this is only further evidence of that fact.
I believe that their relationship, as they kept going on, was getting a little, problematic. I mean, just seemed like there was more and more arguments, and everything she did, I feel like, he thought was wrong. And
everything she did, he thought was wrong. Those words are completely heartbreaking. And yet, that is one of the main warning signs that you will find in almost every form of published literature on this subject. Abusers are often seen as charismatic individuals by those who know them superficially. But in reality, they have incredibly low self-esteem and project their anger of those feelings towards the victim. They externalize and blame their violence on their victim as an excuse for their actions. Additionally, they will often seclude the victim from their family, from their friends, and anyone else who isn't them. And far too often, the victims of this abuse are your own friends and family members. People who you would never imagine are going through this exact same thing. But in Gabby's story, the road trip that began as a hopeful and exciting adventure into the vast wilderness was about to transform into a cascading nightmare that no one saw coming, that no one could have even begun to imagine. Over the last several months, I spent a considerable amount of time researching and listening to the stories of hundreds of domestic violence survivors. And it's because of those voices from people within this community that I realized how important it was to get this video right. But that investment of time was only possible because one organization was willing to help support me in my efforts to advocate for this change. In 2015, I underwent a major spine surgery after a serious car accident that completely totaled my vehicle. Just days after my surgery, the insurance adjuster called to tell me that they would not be covering the cost of my expensive surgery. Despite the fact that I had provided the insurance company everything that they had asked for, and the fact that the accident wasn't my fault, the adjuster made the decision that my medical bills would not be covered. One of the dark secrets about many insurance companies is that they will go to great lengths to avoid paying you what your case is worth. And I found that out the hard way. After having undergone extensive surgery on my spine, weeks of physical therapy, and recovering from the trauma of my injuries, the insurance company offered me $4,500 for my pain and suffering. At the time, I didn't understand that when you are seriously injured in an accident, your case could be worth millions. So I made the decision to stop fighting the insurance company alone and sought competent legal representation. Exactly the kind of expert representation you can find in Morgan & Morgan. Morgan & Morgan is the largest personal injury firm in the United States. They don't settle for the insurance company's often junk lowball offers. In fact, in just the past few months alone, they have achieved incredible outcomes for their clients. $12 million in Florida, 34 times the highest offer from the insurance company. And in Philadelphia, they achieved a $26 million settlement, a staggering 40 times the highest insurance offer. And easily one of the best parts of working with the competent and experienced lawyers of Morgan & Morgan is the fact that the fee for their services is free unless they win your case. Additionally, working with them can be done online from your phone. There is absolutely no need to visit their offices or schedule any appointments. So if you are ever seriously injured in an accident, remember that your case could be worth millions, and you are only a few clicks away from potentially changing your life. It's incredibly easy to do, and you can start your claim right now by filling out the form shown on your screen in under 2 minutes by visiting forthepeople.com/behindcriminalminds. Again, that's forthepeople.com/behindcriminalminds. Their link is available in the description and the pinned comment. And a special thank you to Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's episode. Gabby and Brian's van life journey began in July of 2021, traveling to some of the most beautiful national parks throughout Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. But just a few weeks after their trip began, law enforcement would receive a 911 call from a concerned citizen on August 12th of 2021. The couple was seen by a witness near the Moonflower Community Cooperative in Moab, Utah. The witness report to the 911 dispatcher has become one of the most pivotal elements of this case and would go on to become the basis for a $50 million lawsuit against the Moab Police Department.
Grant County Sheriff's Office.
Hi, can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, I'm calling. I'm right on the corner of Main Street by Moonflower, and we're driving by, and I'd like to report a domestic dispute.
What were they doing?
We drove by, and the gentleman was slapping the girl.
He was slapping her?
Yes, and then we stopped. They ran up and down the sidewalk. He proceeded to hit her, hopped in the car, and they drove off.
Shortly after this call was placed, law enforcement would respond to the scene and eventually caught up to the couple's vehicle, driving erratically down the highway. Law enforcement would eventually conduct a traffic stop to investigate further. The following footage is some of the most widely reported and well-known by anyone even vaguely familiar with Gabby's case, and it's easily the most difficult to watch, knowing where all of this is about to lead. Part of the cycle of domestic violence that is least understood by the general public is the perspective of the victim themselves. The barriers for escaping a violent relationship are different for every person, but almost every instance of domestic violence has one form or another of the following primary barriers. The term love bombing refers to the action of a partner who uses excessive and effusive acts of love and kindness as an early form of control. This behavior is intended to disarm the victim by emulating all of the desired mechanisms of love that the victim wants from the abuser. It is just one of the initial primary tools used against victims as a means to dissuade, eliminate, or entrap the victim and prevent their future attempts to leave. Now, while we cannot be certain of what Gabby's reasons were, one of the more common factors that perpetuate the cycle of abuse is the victim living with the fear that the abuser will become more violent if the victim reports them to law enforcement, or even worse, if the victim attempts to leave. Another common barrier is the feeling from the victim that the relationship isn't entirely abusive, that it is comprised of a mixture of good times, love, and hope. And this feeling often overshadows the fact that it is also marred by manipulation, jealousy, fear, and intimidation. Far too often, victims lack financial resources or have a safe space with ongoing access to support. Coupled with the incredible rise in the cost of living, this issue alone can be stifling for anyone stuck in an abusive relationship, especially when children play a major role in the ongoing need for economic security. And sadly, one of the most diabolical elements of this cycle is that the abuser often uses forms of narcissistic coercive control to manipulate the victim into believing that their violent behavior is the fault of the victim themselves. So with all of that in mind, let's watch the initial footage of law enforcement speaking with Gabby and how she responds after police were already informed that Brian was the aggressor and that he was the one who had been physically violent with Gabby.
What's your guys' names?
Gabby. I'm Brian.
Gabby, Brian? Okay. What's going on? How come you're crying?
I'm just sorry. We've just been fighting this morning. Some personal issues.
It was a long day. We were camping yesterday and camping got the stuff, flies and stuff. I'm sorry I hit the bump there.
I was distracting him from driving. I'm sorry.
Can I get you to step out of the vehicle for me, man?
Yeah.
Just hang tight right there. You want to tell me what's going on?
Yeah, I don't know. know. It's just, some days I have really bad OCD, and I was just cleaning and straightening up the back of the van before, and I was apologizing to him and saying, I'm sorry that I'm so mean, because sometimes I have OCD and sometimes I just get really frustrated. Not like mean towards him, I just like, I guess my vibe is like, I am like in a bad mood.
This footage is incredibly difficult to watch. Not just because we know where this ends, but more so because it's obvious that Gabby is in crisis and so clearly needed help. Right away, she is apologizing to the officer for having distracted Brian, becoming the cause for why they are even being pulled over in the first place. But as we discussed previously, this is a very common feature of victims caught in a relationship marred by domestic violence. The aggressor in this cycle has succeeded in convincing the victim through coercive control that despite how truly abhorrent his behavior is, the mere idea of anyone knowing what's really happening is far worse. And sadly, if these law enforcement officers had received even 5 seconds of proper training concerning domestic violence, they would have known that.
Well, I hate to forget an organic juice bar, but I just quit my job. I was a nutritionist. That was my job. Cool. And I just quit my job to travel across the country, and I'm trying to start a blog. I have a blog and stuff, so I've been building my website, so I've just been really stressed, and he doesn't really believe that I could do any of it, so that's kind of been like a, I don't know, he's like a downer. I don't know, we've just been fighting all morning, and he wouldn't let me in the car before. And then
Why wouldn't he let you in the car? Because of your OCD?
He told me I needed to calm down, yeah. But I'm perfectly calm, I'm calm all the time, and he really stresses me out, and this is a rough morning.
Right now, what we are watching is someone in desperate need of help. Far too often, I've watched true crime videos, reading through the comments of people who blame the victims for not doing enough to help themselves, blaming them for not telling law enforcement what was really going on, or inferring that they could have done more to avoid the situation. But it's my experience that the victims of the cruelty of domestic violence are some of the most kind, gentle, loving, and compassionate people you will ever meet in your entire life. Right now, when I see Gabby, I see a woman who, right or wrong, is lying to protect Brian, despite all of the reasons she had not to. In her efforts to do what she thought was right, she instead was viewed by law enforcement as the aggressor for the crime of defending herself against this miserable, weakling excuse of a man. And when I stumbled on what I believe is the real reason why law enforcement botched this entire interaction, it only made this whole situation that much worse. Gabby Petito, a tiny 5'5", 119-pound girl who just minutes before this interaction with law enforcement would take this picture. A picture that shows clear evidence of having been brutally assaulted. A woman who in this interaction with law enforcement is demonstrating unambiguous signs that she is the victim and not the perpetrator. And all of this is despite the fact that they have already been told by a first-hand witness who saw with his own 2 eyes Brian Laundries strike Gabby not once, but twice. Listen, what I'm about to say is my opinion, and it's my opinion alone. But this isn't incompetence or a failure of proper training. It's criminal negligence, and I'm about to show you why.
So, tell me what's going on.
She just gets worked up sometimes, and I try and really distance myself from her, so like I locked the car and I walked away from her. What happened this morning is that she's trying to start up like her own little website blog and everything, so I give her time, and we really had a nice morning, if anything, but
Did you hear what Brian just said? Well, she gets worked up sometimes. Yeah, Brian, people tend to get a little worked up when you physically assault them. But even in a universe where your tiny little mouse brain is somehow able to concoct the justification you needed to do the horrific things that you did to your fiancé, the fact that you thought to blame her for what you had done is only further conclusive evidence of the narcissistic man-child that you will always be remembered as. But I digress. I will try to be objective about what's happening right now. Because at this stage of the encounter, law enforcement has two separate yet seemingly concurrent stories from Gabby and Brian. Stories that completely contradict what law enforcement was just told in the original 911 call. But for now, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and let's just see how they handle it.
You want to tell me about those scratches on your face?
She had a cell phone in her hand. That's why I was pushing her away. Because she wanted me, I locked the keys so I could walk away. I said, let's just take a breather and let's not, go anywhere. Let's just calm down for a minute because she was getting a little worked up. And then she had her phone and was trying to get the keys from me, so I got in the way. I was just trying to, I know I shouldn't push, but I was just trying to push her away to go, let's just take a minute, step back and breathe. And she got me with her phone.
You want to tell me about hitting that curb?
Hitting the curb was her grip on the wheel.
Once again, we have Brian blaming Gabby and deflecting responsibility for the scratch that he has on his face. But if that weren't enough, he also proceeds to blame her for his erratic driving. And it would seem that Gabby is responsible for literally every single problem that he has in his life. Do you remember the signs and behaviors of an abuser we just went over? Because to absolutely no one's surprise, in the weeks following this debacle, people who knew Brian came forward, saying that his behavior was something of a theme in his life. His former coworkers would explain that he had the propensity to get angry and fly off the handle for even the smallest and most insignificant inconvenience or perceived offense. And all of this childish, feckless behavior is the hallmark of a narcissistic abuser, demonstrating classic signs of coercive control. And frankly, I do not care if law enforcement was trained to recognize these signs or not. Because all of this is just common sense. You don't need a psychology degree or some kind of advanced training to see who is in crisis in this situation. It's completely obvious who in this encounter is very clearly trying to manipulate the officers and avoid any form of accountability whatsoever. Before the next minute of footage, you try and see if you can recognize what tactic or form of manipulation that is being demonstrated by Brian to the police.
What about the speed? Did she take over the pedal on you?
If I was going fast, I'm sorry. No, it's probably just the moment of, I'm still shaking now. The adrenaline, seeing the lights flashing up and then her grip on the wheel. So if I sped up, I'm sorry about that. Or if I was speeding beforehand, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, it took quite a bit to catch up to you. So,
yeah. I'm sorry about that. We're just going into the park again to get water because we have a 6-gallon water container to fill up. So we're just grabbing water for the hike. Okay. And I was trying to keep everything calm and quiet because there's plans still to go for a hike, but it's good. Yeah, I'm really sorry about that.
Of course.
Did you catch it? I can say from experience, one of the most difficult parts of being a survivor of a DV relationship is managing the perception of others, specifically how people around you view the abuser. Far too often, they are highly personable, easygoing, master manipulators, and can find ways to avoid detection by using charm, exuberant kindness, and other forms of maneuvering that make them appear to be harmless or even humble. But you only need to encounter this type of person once, because once you do, you'll recognize them for the rest of your life.
Where'd you hit him? You slapped him first? It's on his face? How many times did you slap?
Bravo, Romeo, India, Alpha, November.
And then what? And his reaction was to do what?
He's going to be out of Florida.
He just grabbed you? Did he hit you though? I mean, it's okay if you're saying you hit him, but I understand if he hit you, but we want to know the truth if he actually hit you. Because, where did he hit you? Don't worry, be honest.
In this moment, Gabby is being questioned for the purpose of trying to establish if she should be arrested. While law enforcement may appear to be concerned about her well-being, nothing could be further from the truth. They want to know answers to their questions so they know who, if anyone, is getting cited, arrested, or going to jail. The tragedy is that during this entire encounter, we see no evidence of anyone discussing what they were told by the original 911 caller who saw Brian strike Gabby twice. The cycle of domestic violence is a confusing mirage of contradictions and choices that are often made with well-meaning intentions by the victim. Decisions obscured through a haze of manipulation that is easily misinterpreted as love, and anyone with any modicum of life experience who is paying any attention at all would see the clear signs that something is very wrong with this less than routine traffic stop.
I've taken my anxiety and bringing it down, but my ex-wife, I'm just sharing, I know it's a little personal, but to help you understand, we would feed off each other's anxiety of the spiral, you know what I mean? And it doesn't matter how much I loved her. It may be bad for your soul, just saying. I'm not telling you what to do with your life, but if you know you have anxiety, look at the situations you can get in, you know what I mean?
What we just heard was one of the officers scolding Gabby for her anxiety, blaming the victim for their own assault, and essentially telling her that in so many words, this is all her fault, which in and of itself is unbelievable. But then one of the other officers interjects and asks a very important question. Did Gabby grab the wheel of the van, causing Brian to swerve out of his lane and hit the curb? Listen very carefully to this exchange.
Quick question. You said you were hitting him in the arm. Did you grab the steering wheel?
No, I didn't.
You did not touch the steering wheel?
I didn't touch the steering wheel, but only for like a second, because I just saw the lights come on, and it was more just like, you're an idiot. Like, you know.
But did you grab the steering wheel and swerve or anything like that?
No. I didn't touch the steering wheel at all.
There is absolutely no question that Gabby has clearly answered this question, not once, but twice. She has very plainly told this officer that she did not touch the steering wheel, and yet, as we've already heard, this was one of the very first things that Brian claims she did. And for me, this would be the very moment where I would believe that Gabby Petito was clearly the victim, and there is a very simple reason why. Since the beginning of this interaction, Gabby has thrown herself under the bus. She's admitted to having physically struck Brian and has showed no signs of intentional deceit. And yet her story has just completely contradicted what Brian has already said. One of them is obviously lying. But Gabby has no reason to lie when she's already accepted the blame for everything, and she is very emphatically denying having grabbed the wheel. So by virtue of that fact, if Brian is already showing signs of deception, and it's evident that he is, a man who is obviously nervous and is very likely concerned about the ramifications of having just assaulted his fiancée in public, coupled with the fact that there are signs that Gabby is terrified, in crisis, and is trying to protect herself and her abuser, in tandem with the 911 call establishing Brian as the aggressor, not Gabby. Oh, and let's not forget the fact that Gabby Petito took this picture just 3 minutes before this body cam footage began. Simply put, if anyone had been paying attention at all, then Brian Laundrie would have ended up in handcuffs. And you're about to see just how obvious Brian's culpability is about to get.
Do you mind lifting up your right sleeve for me? I'm curious about something.
It's a little bit of nails. I suppose fingernails, but I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining about
Is
fingernails.
it bruised or tender or anything like
No.
that?
Okay. I'm fine, and I love Gabby. I hope she doesn't have too many complaints about me. I'm just, I feel bad I had to get so public. I was just trying to be loud. See, this is, I just try to make her calm down and be like, look, everyone's watching.
It would be so easy to hear Brian say those words and just skip right over them, exactly the same way that law enforcement did. Brian has just been told that he has scratches on his neck, and Gabby has signs that she's been assaulted too. But Brian doesn't use this as an opportunity to defend himself or explain himself. Instead, he deflects law enforcement's commentary and says something far more disturbing.
No. I'm fine, and I love Gabby. I hope she doesn't have too many complaints about me.
If you've ever met a true narcissistic abuser, then you've heard a variation of this exact kind of commentary before. Brian is attempting to dissemble and avoid suspicion. He's trying to play the part of the kind-hearted good guy who was smacked around by his girlfriend but doesn't want any repercussions. From the very beginning of this interaction with law enforcement, Brian Laundrie has used the masterclass tool set of an abuser. He has succeeded in classifying Gabby as someone who is OCD and highly anxious, that she was the aggressor and that he was the one just attempting to mitigate the situation by trying to calm her down unsuccessfully. And now he's disarming whatever complaints she may have against him by saying that he loves her and that he hopes whatever complaints she has aren't greater than the innocence that he is so desperate to portray. Like I said before, you only need to be exposed to a narcissistic, abusive partner once in your life. And when you do, you'll recognize the many masks they wear to hide their true identity. Because when you've seen one, you've seen them all.
You don't take any medications or anything like that? Are you normally this kind of like hyper?
Do I see my heart rate, whenever the lights flash on, it gets here.
Yeah, do you know if she takes any?
She's crazy. No, I don't think so.
Gaslighting is one of the most despicable tools of the abuser. They will often say the most heinous, hateful, and intentionally hurtful comments you could even begin to imagine, and then play it off as a joke or claim you're too sensitive, saying that you are incapable of handling the truth. And then they will weaponize your response as evidence that their original assertions about you have just been proven true. But what we have seen is Brian attempting to use humor and charm to dissuade law enforcement's suspicions and to view him as the victim. And what's so amazing about it is how often this works. Abusers often endear themselves to authority figures, your loved ones, your friends, coworkers, and anyone else who could possibly be a future confidant to you. And they use this form of coercive control to wrongly convince the victim that when or if the day comes that you dare to speak the truth about them, that no one will believe you.
He said that he never saw the male strike the female. He saw the male trying to lock her out of the vehicle. She even told us that he was trying to lock her out, told her to go take a walk, so that she was trying to get in. She eventually couldn't get in and actually clawed her way in through the driver's door. He says, I don't understand why she's doing that. Well, I think it's because it was the only door that wasn't locked that she could get through. So she's trying to get in over him. He's trying to disengage from her. I guess he hung her backpack on the back probably so she'd have her shit so that he didn't have to engage with her. Everything she's saying is the same thing. I haven't heard what he said, but if that's what he said, it's also what the witness is saying. The witness says, I never saw him hit her. I saw him shove her, but I couldn't tell if it was an aggression against her or a defense against her as far as her, being the aggressor. So at this point, unless the guy's screaming that he needs to go to jail and did something to this girl, it sounds to me like she is the primary aggressor.
Officer Eric Pratt was just communicating to one of the other responding officers about his assessment of the situation. As we heard, he mentions that a second witness, and not the original 911 caller, had told him that he didn't see Brian assaulting Gabby. Within a matter of seconds, he concludes that Gabby must be the offender and that she is the likely culprit in this assault. Over the course of the next 15 minutes, these two law enforcement officers go above and beyond the call of duty to help Brian, the abuser, to ensure that he feels safe, comfortable, and even make sure that he has a place to stay for the night. They go on to encourage him about their shared experience with their significant others and wives, implying that they too understand what it's like to deal with an anxious woman. And honestly, it's disgusting, especially listening to them continue to offer Brian their sympathy. I genuinely cannot believe that we live in a time where the words that I just spoke are real, especially in light of everything the officers could have done to protect Gabby. And yet somehow this interaction would only continue to get worse.
Gabby, this is a very, very important question. How you answer this question is going to determine what happens next. But the only person who can answer this question is you. Think very hard before you answer the question. Do not quickly answer. Think very hard. When you slapped him those times, were you attempting to cause him physical pain or physical impairment? Was that what you were attempting to do to him? No. What were you attempting to do? What was the reason behind the slapping and stuff? What was it you were attempting to accomplish by slapping?
I was trying to get him to stop telling me to calm down.
Well, it doesn't sound to me like she attempted to injure him.
This exchange between Gabby and law enforcement exposes one of the biggest flaws in the American criminal justice system. These officers are playing the role of an on-the-job criminal attorney who interprets the law in real time. But they don't have any legal education whatsoever, and it's unbelievable that the very people we send out to enforce the law are so often completely unaware of what those laws actually say. And that's because these officers very wrongly believed that intent to cause harm was necessary in an arrest, but that was not at all what the law actually said. In fact, in the subsequent investigation that stemmed from this interaction with Gabby and Brian, it was revealed that these officers misunderstood the law and applied it incorrectly. Because if they had acted within the scope of their duty or contacted their local DA to ask for guidance, someone would have gone to jail that day. And clearly, it should have been Brian Laundrie. The number of mistakes and blunders that happened within a matter of minutes in this interaction is absolutely staggering. Upon the release of the damning report against the Moab Police Department, a massive public outcry began a campaign against the most egregious offender from this interaction, specifically Officer Eric Pratt. Media attention, coupled with the Petito family's lawsuit against the department, helped to unearth disturbing details about Officer Pratt's background, including a disconcerting report that Officer Pratt had allegedly threatened to kill a woman for whom he was having an affair, allegedly threatening her life with a crowbar. In fact, this perceived prejudice against women would form the basis for the Petito family's $50 million lawsuit against the Moab Police Department for what they believed was a bias against their daughter by this now notorious officer. But despite the public's demand for accountability and action by the Moab Police Department, Officer Eric Pratt would be given a very different role within his department. He wasn't fired. He wasn't demoted or moved to desk work. He wasn't suspended or forced to take any form of mandatory training. In the face of an unmitigated failure, despite the outrage of millions, regardless of a pending investigation into his alleged threats against his former mistress and his failure to protect Gabby Petito's life, Officer Eric Pratt, he was promoted. Following the events of August 12, 2021, Gabby and Brian were separated for the night, with Brian staying at a domestic violence shelter at the behest and direction of law enforcement. But what would transpire over the next several weeks would become the center of national attention, the outcome of which would reveal a heartless and violent premeditated plan to avoid responsibility for a truly unforgivable crime. On Tuesday, August 17th, less than a week after Gabby and Brian's interaction with the Moab Police Department, Brian flew from Utah back home to Florida to allegedly close out his storage unit. Once the case became national news, the public wanted answers for this seemingly odd behavior. Answers that would come from Brian's criminal defense attorney, Stephen Bertolino. Answers that would only increase suspicion, especially because the explanation his attorney provided claimed that Brian spent $1,000 on a round-trip flight just so that he could save a few dollars by consolidating and closing his storage shed. Gabby's YouTube channel releases its first and only video on Thursday, August 19th of 2021. The video is hopeful and helps to show what kind of person Gabby truly was to her core.
Hello, and good morning. It is really nice and sunny today. It's only 10 o'clock in the morning, but it rained all afternoon yesterday.
Oh my God! The 10 is just coming in on me. The wind is so bad. I've just been sitting here like this for a while.
Someone who, despite everything she had just been through in the prior week alone, was still pursuing her dreams and showing the world who she truly was. Someone who was compassionate, loving, and who wanted to make the world better than she found it. And in the 2+ years since she posted her first and only YouTube video, the video has gone on to amass over 7 million views and counting, proving that her life will continue to reach millions for years to come. Just 2 days later, on Saturday the 21st of August, Gabby spoke with her father, Joe, who ordered her Uber Eats to her hotel. This would be the last time the two would ever speak. That following Monday, on the 23rd of August, Brian Laundrie returned to Utah and rejoined Gabby. That next day, Gabby's mother, Nicole Schmidt, would speak with her daughter for the last and final time. Gabby told her mother that she was en route to Grand Teton, Wyoming, and was planning on going to Yellowstone National Park shortly thereafter. After the call, a confluence of strange activity would begin that to this very day we have never received a full accounting of from the one group of people that the media, law enforcement, and the public always believed knew more than they were claiming from the very beginning. Brian's parents, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie. But the full scope of what they knew and when would not stay hidden forever. Gabby would post on Instagram for the last time on Wednesday, August 25th of 2021. To that point, Gabby typically used location tags in her Instagram post to identify where she was. But this post had none, and yet that wasn't the only issue that many people would notice. Her Instagram post said, "Happy Halloween," but Halloween was over 2 months away. This would become one of the many glaring problems stemming from this tragedy, specifically because evidence would be released that demonstrated that during this period of time, Brian was believed to be in control of Gabby's phone and was communicating to her loved ones in an effort to delay the revelation of what he had done to Gabby. Once the general public was made aware of Gabby's disappearance in September, a couple from TikTok would release footage of their journey through Grand Teton, Wyoming. In it, we see video evidence showing Gabby Petito's white van on August 27th. The video of Gabby's van was captured around 6 to 6:30 p.m. local time in Grand Teton. But less than an hour later, Gabby's mother would receive a very ominous text. In it, Gabby told her mother that she was radically changing her previous plans. She now wanted to be solo in her van life touring, and that Brian agreed with this change. Gabby would tell her mom that Brian would now be camping in a tent in the woods by himself. Unfortunately, we don't know much more about this text from the family, but what we do know is that this would be the first of many very disturbing interactions. Around the time the public became aware of Gabby's disappearance, Miranda Baker, a TikTok creator, posted a shocking video about her experience with Brian Laundrie. In it, she explains that on August 29th, She and her boyfriend picked up Brian just after 5 p.m. at Coulter Bay, inside Grand Teton National Park. But one of the most disturbing parts of her interaction was the fact that Brian offered them $200 for a ride that was only supposed to be 10 miles. However, it was what Miranda conveyed concerning Brian's statements about Gabby that would help to shed light on the inhumane crime that Brian was desperate to hide.
But before he came in the car, he offered to pay us like $200 to give him a ride, like 10 miles. So that was kind of weird. He then told us he's been camping for multiple days without his fiance. He did say he had a fiance, and that she was working on their social media page back at their van.
Just one day later, on the 30th of August, deeply disconcerting messages began being sent from Gabby's phone. Gabby's mother received a text message saying, "No service in Yosemite." But there was just one major problem with that message, and that was the fact that Gabby never told anyone that she was going to Yosemite, California. She said she was going to Yellowstone, Wyoming, a difference of nearly 1,000 miles from where her family believed Gabby had been in the preceding days. This was compounded by the fact that Gabby's phone would send another disturbing message a short time later. It read, "Can you please tell Stan I don't have service in Yosemite? The phone's not ringing, we're just getting his voicemails." Stan was Gabby's grandfather, a name that Gabby never used to refer to a man she loved dearly and for whom she would never disrespect. 48 hours later, Brian Laundrie arrived back home to his parents' house in North Point, Florida. He arrived driving her white van, but without his fiancée, Gabby Petito. And from this moment forward, everything that would happen and every lie that was told would go on to become a concentrated effort to withhold evidence, to obstruct a homicide investigation, and eliminate any possibility that Brian Laundrie would be held accountable for the crimes that he had perpetrated. And no matter what you may think you know about this case, I promise you, the truth of what really happened is far worse than you could even begin to imagine. What would you say to your child if they arrived home from a lengthy road trip without their significant other, and they were driving their vehicle and were in possession of their cell phone and credit cards? And what if that significant other lived in your home and your child left them in the wilderness without any form of transportation, without any means of communication or access to their finances? What would you do? Would you demand answers? Would you ask where they were and ensure that they were safe? Now, I understand that the answer may seem completely obvious, but if you're Chris and Roberta Laundrie, apparently you would do none of those things. But instead, just a week after your son arrives home, despite having not heard from Gabby whatsoever, you would choose to take him on a camping trip. And eventually, when Gabby's family calls and texts you pleading for information about where your son left their daughter, you simply refuse to answer or respond to them at all. You dodge their questions, you decline their calls, and instead, you hire a criminal defense lawyer who helps shield you from the one thing you never bothered to teach your son: accountability. And the evidence that this word never entered the lexicon of your vocabulary is evident in every single thing you do. Most especially this letter, the one you wrote to your son just around the same time that Gabby went missing. Every single thing about the words in this letter is purely vile and should be seen as the example of how not to parent your children. Listen to exactly what Roberta Laundrie has to say to her son, Brian. Quote, "No matter what we do or where we go or what we say, we will always love each other. If you're in jail, I will bake you a cake with a file in it. If you need to dispose of a body, I will show up with a shovel and garbage bags. That is completely disgusting, but apparently the Laundries have claimed that this letter was written before Brian committed his heinous crimes. But I have something to say about that. Roberta, you truly expect the general public to believe that this letter was written before Brian's disgusting crimes against Gabby? So then why in the world did you write "burn after reading" on the front of the letter? Make it make sense. You would have had no reason to write that on the letter unless you knew full well that a criminal investigation was forthcoming and you didn't want evidence of the fact that you knew that your son had committed a cold-blooded homicide. And when you allow your children to believe that nothing they have done or will ever do will result in any form of consequences for their actions, this is exactly what you get. An insecure, useless, feeble abuser who wreaks pain and suffering on everyone they encounter. What you get is a legacy of pain that no one will ever forget because Brian will never be remembered as anything less than a pathetic loser. I truly hope it was worth it, Roberta. I truly do. And as we know, the Laundries went on their family vacation on September 6th and 7th, but just 1 week later, under extraordinarily suspicious circumstances, the Laundries would finally contact law enforcement after having spent weeks refusing to speak to them at all. But this time, it was not to inform them of what they knew or anything their son had told them, but to report that now he was missing. Never mind the fact that they got their dates wrong of when he actually went missing, which in and of itself is completely unbelievable, especially when you find out what they knew weeks before he went on his impromptu hiking trip. But according to the Laundries, their son left their home to go hiking in the T. Mabry Carlton Reserve in Sarasota County, Florida, and had not been heard from since. By this point in the investigation, law enforcement already had a warrant out for Brian's arrest. So with the news of his disappearance, they began a massive search. And for well over a month, an entire detachment of officers, cadaver dogs, volunteers, and expert first responders scoured the entire area where Brian had gone hiking. Now, despite the fact that the area was flooded during their search, it's very important to know that trained cadaver dogs can locate human remains even underwater up to 30 feet deep. But wouldn't you know it, a miracle happened on October 20th. Only 5 weeks after Brian's disappearance, his full skeletal remains were located. And despite hundreds of people searching that same area, Brian Laundrie was located by none other than his parents, Chris and Roberta Laundrie. The coroner's office determined that he succumbed to a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. And you should probably totally disregard the fact that he used his non-dominant hand, something that just doesn't happen according to criminal experts on the subject matter, or the fact that his remains were somehow skeletonized despite being underwater, which again flies in the face of literal science. And you should also disregard the fact that his mother had already said to him that she would help assist him in getting away with murder or even escaping from jail. And I suppose you would even need to ignore the fact that his parents somehow found their son despite the fact that dozens and dozens and dozens of volunteers had already been through that exact same area multiple times with cadaver dogs and had found absolutely nothing. But you know, I suppose if you don't find that extremely concerning, you might also be the kind of person who would love to buy some bargain-priced beachfront land plots in Arizona. Inventory won't last long. Call 1-800-I'm-GULLIBLE or visit www.pleasefortheloveofgodtellmethisisAdream.com. Don't wait. Operators are standing by. I mean, come on. It's just ridiculous. But everything I just said would pale in comparison to what the Laundries had been hiding from the very beginning.
Now, new documents released in hundreds of pages of depositions show Brian's father, Chris, says Brian called him in a frantic state saying Gabby is gone. But after being asked for help, Brian's father called attorney Stephen Bertolino, then sent him a $25,000 retainer. Despite saying earlier in the depositions they had love for Gabby, Chris and Roberta Laundries say they never considered contacting Gabby's parents after learning Gabby was gone.
On August 29th, 2021, the exact same day that Brian Laundrie was picked up by Miranda Baker and her boyfriend, Chris and Roberta Laundrie received a frantic call from their son, Brian. In the call, Brian stated to his parents that Gabby was, and I quote, gone. Brian would go on to tell his parents in the call that he needed a lawyer and then hung up the phone. And you are going to want to remember this fact, but just a few days later, on September 2nd, 2021, attorney Stephen Bertolino contacted and retained a Wyoming criminal defense firm on behalf of his new client, Brian Laundrie. Additionally, we learned that Brian met with Stephen Bertolino after he arrived back home in Florida. No logical human being would hear this information and not immediately come to the reasonable conclusion that Chris and Roberta Laundrie not only knew their son had ended the life of Gabby Petito, but they willfully participated in a concerted effort to assist their son in avoiding any form of culpability. And what is exponentially worse, by virtue of their actions, they denied justice to Gabby and to the entire Petito family. Listen, this is just my opinion, but the actions of the Laundries are worse than cowardice, because their actions fulfill the legal prongs of a criminal conspiracy that, in my opinion, should result in the immediate arrest and prosecution of both parents as accomplices after the fact. Specifically for their participation in the cover-up of Brian's ghastly crime, as well as their ongoing efforts to obstruct justice and to become accessories in this vicious crime. But in case you aren't convinced that the Laundries should be held criminally responsible for their involvement in this crime, pay close attention to the lawyer that they hired to speak on their behalf and exactly what he's about to say.
When did you become involved with the Laundrie family as their attorney pertaining to this particular case?
Yes, good evening, Ashley, and thank you for having me. I would say that was on September 11th.
Attorney Stephen Bertolino has just made a catastrophic error. He made the choice to go on to national television and then make the audacious claim that he did not become involved in Laundrie's case until September the 11th of 2021. Well, if that's the case, then I have an incredibly important question. If attorney Bertolino wasn't involved in this case until the 11th of September, then how in the world did he contact a Wyoming-based criminal defense law firm and retain them on September the 2nd, 9 days earlier? Under what imaginable authority would anyone, lawyer or otherwise, have to hire a law firm on behalf of someone that they don't even represent, especially if that lawyer is not even involved in the case? That, Mr. Bertolino, makes no sense at all. Now, initially, I was baffled by the date of the 11th. What possible relevance did the 11th of September even have? What an incredibly odd coincidence. On the very same day that Gabby Petito is reported missing, somehow, magically, attorney Stephen Bertolino is brought into the case. And it's almost like he understands exactly how bad it would look for him and his clients to have hired him weeks before Gabby was even reported missing. Because that would not only imply that they knew that their son had committed a homicide, but that they were actively participating in what could easily be described as a cover-up. But if you think you don't like Stephen Bertolino now, just wait, because this clown show is about to go completely off the rails.
At any point in the last 5 weeks, have you spoken with Brian Laundrie?
Yes, I spoke to Brian Laundrie on September 12th and September 13th.
Once again, Attorney Bertolino deflects the truth. He knows that he spoke to Brian before the 11th of September and for some ridiculous reason thinks that lying about that fact is going to go unnoticed. And one important thing to know, at this moment in time, this interview is being conducted hours after Brian's remains had been discovered. And what begins as a cordial conversation is going to quickly descend into chaos.
Let's talk about the reserve. A lot of people can't wrap their minds around the fact that the reserve had been searched week after week, was reopened to the public, and then less than 24 hours, the parents went out there. What did they share with you about their reasoning for going out there and why they knew specifically where to go?
You know, Marnie, as I've stated several times yesterday and now throughout today, you know, it's not about knowing specifically where to go. The park was just recently opened. I believe it was Tuesday or Wednesday that the park was open. Chris and Roberta wanted to go in the park again to search for their son. They started at the beginning of the preserve. It just so happened that that's where Brian was. So my thought would be anybody who's questioning that, it's not too bright.
Try to put this moment in time into perspective. The Petito family has been desperately trying to find their daughter. They are using the resources of social media, law enforcement, the mainstream media, and anyone available to look for their child. And their nightmare is magnified by the fact that the Laundries have completely stonewalled them at every imaginable turn. Instead of trying to help them, they now have their lawyer going on national news and insulting the swaths of concerned citizens who do not believe their narrative. In what universe is his response appropriate or acceptable? You have got to be kidding me.
Well, clarify that, because I think no one has the answers here. Certainly the public doesn't. You have more answers than most. We assume that the parents knew more than we do. So clarify what the public doesn't understand about what's going on.
What the public doesn't understand, I don't understand. You have a trailhead. The trailhead marks the beginning of a trail. You don't jump from the sky and land in the middle of the preserve. You start at the trailhead. That's where the parents started. The parents walked into the park from the entrance to the park or the trailhead. They went about a mile or so, and that's where they found the items and the remains. What is so difficult to understand about that? It's not very difficult because it's very simple, and the public doesn't understand simplicity or the truth. You want to make something of it.
You know, I have to give it to this anchor because there is no way I would have been able to keep my composure with such a smug, disrespectful, and rude little man berating me and my listeners for not towing the line of his narrative. And yet, Wish.com Mr. Clean over here is about to lower the bar in a way that I did not know was even possible.
You've called that hogwash. You've called the suggestion that items were planted were hogwash. Why is that?
Marnie, I thought I was very clear in just explaining to you why. Do you realize how ludicrous that is? How aggravating, how maddening it is to even hear those things? And the fact that it's being put out there by the press as well? That's where my level of frustration and anger is coming from. Maybe somebody with a platform should step up and say, hey, knock it off. This is just silly. So if I'm the only one who has to say that this is hogwash because I didn't want to say the word bullshit, then I'm going to say it. It's bullshit. And I'm sorry if John Q. Public doesn't get that.
I simply cannot begin to fathom the unmitigated audacity it requires to go on to national television on the heels of your client having committed such a heinous crime which he full well knew Brian was responsible for, and then proceed to berate the entirety of the concerned populace who have taken interest in this case and have also noticed the monumental lies that have been perpetrated by the Laundrie family and now their lawyer, because a lie of omission is still a lie, whether you like it or not.
At any point when they were searching for Gabby, did you feel the need, compelled to help?
I can tell you that at this moment in time, Chris and Roberta Laundrie just learned that their son's remains were identified. He is now no longer with them. At some point in time in the future, there may be more information as what I felt, what the Laundries felt, what we, quote, ethically, thought about the case. Now is not the time to do that. You've asked me the question 2 or 3 times, and I'm going to respectfully tell you again, it's not the time to discuss that.
What are the Laundries' plans now?
At the moment, they're going to grieve their son.
And then what?
Monty, I don't mean to be rude, and I know you have a job to do. They were just told less than a half hour ago that their son is deceased. Do you think that they really have thoughts on anything other than that their son is no longer with them? The fact that the public is continuing this nonsensical, we're hiding him in the beginning, but there are people in your position, maybe not you, but in your position, that never once pushed back on these so-called experts and pundits who did nothing but say, this is immoral, this is unethical. Somewhere along the line, somebody with a platform, someone in your position should have said, hey, you know what? Back off.
And now the cycle of abuse has come full circle. Brian Laundrie, a documented domestic violence abuser, a miserable excuse of a man-child who ended the life of a beautiful young woman just beginning her life, has not only succeeded in terrorizing her and her family while denying them the truth of what actually happened, where she was, and how to bring her home, but now his family has weaponized their detestable lawyer who has gone on to berate anyone who dares ask a question that he deems inappropriate. But this is precisely what abusers do. They cause destruction, they proceed to deflect, lie, and obscure the truth, and then somehow turn it all around and make themselves the victim. And in case I haven't made it crystal clear, the Laundries are not the victim in this case. They never were. And frankly, I am overjoyed that the Petito family sued the Laundries and their pathetic excuse of a lawyer, because while they may not have received the justice they deserved for Gabby in the form of Brian's prosecution, knowing that this man had to pay them for his involvement in their suffering, now that's a form of justice I can get behind. But even after all that transpired in this case, there is still so much left to learn. And it's the lessons that Gabby's life left behind that will forever overshadow the injustice of what the Laundries sought to do by hiding behind rules and technicalities. But one of the things that I've learned about this case, Gabby Petito may not have been able to live the life she deserved, but the impact she made, it's more compelling and far-reaching than we could have even begun to imagine. One of the most foundational pillars of the justice system is the idea that laws that we have enacted equally govern each of us and are universal, that the law is applied equally to everyone, and that our choice as a society to follow these laws allows for all of us to live within our communities safely, absent of the anarchy that would exist within our system without rules or structure. But the reality is that cases like that of Gabby Petito reveal a dark and sinister side of the justice system that we have accepted as immutable law for far too long. I realize that what I'm about to say flies in the face of hundreds of years of established legal precedent. But if we cannot find a way to do what's right without hiding behind laws that largely protect criminals and not the victims, then maybe it's time to reevaluate. In the days following Gabby's disappearance becoming national news, the Laundries attorney Stephen Bertolino intended on having a press conference. Bertolino claims that the FBI dissuaded him from doing so. So instead, he made this comment on behalf of the Laundrie family, with their permission, directly to the Petito family and the media.
On behalf of the Laundrie family, I hope that Miss Petito is located and that she's reunited with her family.
We hope that Gabby is located. And you know, located is a very curious word to use. It's almost as though he knows exactly what his client did to Gabby, and he's banking that law enforcement will likely find where Brian left her, which is why he is so careful to use the words located and reunited. And did you notice he never once stated that he hoped she was found safe or alive for that matter? It's almost as though he knew that was impossible. And if I was given 1,000 lifetimes, I could not concoct a more diabolical statement, one that sidesteps responsibility and refuses the Petito family the one thing that they had begged for from the very beginning, their daughter, because all they ever wanted was to bring Gabby home. And it's why when I heard that they eventually sued the Laundrie family and their lawyer, Stephen Bertolino, I was overjoyed. Because we live in a country where someone like Brian Laundrie can commit this disgusting atrocity against an innocent woman who was likely the object of his abuse for the entirety of their relationship. Then proceeds to call his parents, admit to them that he's ended Gabby's life, then go on to tell a family friend who just happens to be a criminal defense lawyer what he has done to Gabby. And the law says that Brian Laundrie is the one who is protected. But it doesn't stop there. He not only enjoys the safe harbor of attorney-client privilege in life, but also in death. So I ask you, where are the protections for Gabby? Where are the protections for the countless women like her who have endured these same crimes day after day, year after year with no end in sight? Give me one good reason why we protect the likes of Brian Laundrie and watch as he and his family are allowed to do nothing despite knowing full well the crimes that their son had committed. And believe it or not, there are people who defend the Laundries. And if that's you, I want you to tell me, where's the justice in that? Because far too many people will argue that the laws say that Brian's parents and his pathetic excuse of a lawyer have zero responsibility, legally speaking, in reporting this crime, let alone sharing what they knew with Gabby Petito's family, which, by the way, they could have done completely anonymously, if for no other reason than to share the information that they knew could have spared the Petito family weeks of unbridled anguish wondering where Gabby was. And let me be clear, if Brian Laundrie had been my child and he had come to me with the news that he had ended the life of his fiancée, there is not a single cell in my body that has any doubt in how I would respond to that situation. My love for my children is absolute, but I refuse to participate in covering up a despicable crime under the delusion that I would be protecting him. Because no matter what anyone says, that is not love. That's the embodiment of how and why Brian became the narcissistic, controlling, lying coward that he became, because he was raised by parents who taught him that nothing he ever did or would ever do would result in any form of consequence. We all understand that the law says that lawyers have a legal and ethical responsibility to protect their clients and the secrets that their clients divulge. And on its face, I agree that attorney-client privilege is paramount to that relationship. But becoming party to a homicide is the line, and we have to do better than the arbitrary rules that we have designed for ourselves. Because there ought to be provisions within the law that allow for a lawyer to do the right thing. Because if I had to make the choice, and it was the decision between keeping alive for a monstrous human being like Brian Laundrie and losing my bar license in order to tell the family where they could find their daughter, I would rather lose my job, my career, and anything else that demands that I lose my humanity in order to maintain a lie. And if that is somehow a radical statement, then let me say without any further ambiguity, Gabby and every woman who has ever been the victim of a violent crime. Far too often live within a reality where the person who enjoys the most protection from the law is the abuser. The very person who is wreaking havoc in someone's life is only ever held accountable after they have committed a vicious crime, and even then are allowed to obfuscate, lie, and continue to terrorize the very people that have been the objects of their criminal behavior. This system is beyond broken, and it's long past time for all of this to change. What do you see when you watch this couple? If this moment in time was all you knew about them, what assumptions would you make about their relationship? I think for the vast majority of us, it would be hard to see anything less than a truly happy couple, clearly in love, people who seem to be in a healthy and passionate relationship. But unfortunately, nothing could be further from the truth, because this is the aftermath of what was hiding behind the veneer of a couple who seemed to be perfect in every way. But despite everything she's been through, this creator uses her platform to warn and empower others to step away from their own hidden battlefields. Domestic violence is a truly insidious crime against a person's body, their mind, and their soul. And while many people are aware of the end result of what happened to Gabby, far fewer people seem to realize when they are caught within the malicious cycle of abuse. But this isn't just about Gabby. There's a far more serious issue at play, and frankly, I'm sick and tired of not talking about it. On Sunday, June 26, 2011, Stephen McDaniel broke into the apartment of his neighbor, Lauren Giddings, using a master key. McDaniel had been stalking Lauren for weeks, and within a matter of minutes overpowered her and ended her life. Her remains would be recovered in numerous garbage bags found on the property of her apartment complex. On April 1st of this year, Sade Robinson was reported missing. Law enforcement was informed that Sade had gone missing following her date with Maxwell Anderson. Tragically, pieces of her remains would be located by investigators, confirming that her disappearance would be transformed into a homicide. Madeline Kingsbury was reported missing on March 31st, 2023, but her remains would eventually be located a few short months later.
About a month before she disappeared, Maddie asked a friend advice on how to get out of abusive relationships, even saying, quote, "If anything happens to me, know that Adam did it. I would never leave my kids." That friend told police that Maddie's ex-boyfriend, Adam Fravel, had been beating her for years, but she didn't report it because she didn't want her kids in the middle of it.
Law enforcement would place Maddie's former partner, Adam Fravel, under arrest for her homicide. On April 27th of this year, Micah Miller's remains were found in a North Carolina state park. She was the wife of Pastor John Paul Miller of South Carolina. And in just the last few days, considerable evidence has been released alleging years of abuse from her husband, the pastor of Solid Rock Church. The following footage is of TikTok creator Lacey Kratz. She is recording herself walking through a park, while at the same time being stalked by a man that she does not know. Despite walking in different directions and even making attempts to speed up, the man continues to follow her and refuses to leave her alone. Since 1980 alone, tens of thousands of Indigenous women have gone missing and thousands more have become victims of homicide, and their stories largely go unreported.
Across the United States, Native women are vanishing without a trace.
We hear about these women disappearing. I never thought it would happen to us.
Every single case you just heard is an infinitesimally small representation of the reality that women all over the world live in today. And yet there seems to be this illusion that this problem is something we cannot change. That somehow all of these crimes against women are tragic but inevitable, and all we can hope to do is tell their stories and advocate for a better future. But I believe that these crimes start long before we ever read their names scrolling past a media banner on our screens. I believe these problems begin in our homes. What you are watching may be foreign to some of you, but this TikTok video is from a female gaming content creator who has a considerable following online. She and countless other female creators just like her have made hundreds of videos demonstrating the following behavior that they receive on a daily basis, simply because they exist, simply because they are women.
Men need to do better, because this is what happens when I say one word in Call of Duty.
I'll give
Bless
you.
you. You're welcome.
That's a whole
I needed that.
That's a transmission, bro. Don't talk to that thing. It's a transmission, bro. That's a hermaphrodite, bro.
That's one of them transmitters. That's what you're talking about. It's one of them transmitters.
You're an abomination. You are the abomination of
Shut up. Your dog water? Fat. Get off my team?
Don't you smell like
it's kind of hard.
Oh God, that dude die kills and slim fast. But I could focus, but bro, I got that fat bitch on my mind. I'm trying to help her lose some weight.
Yo, bark for me, girl.
Speak. You know that ugly, real tall.
I bet you look like the Scream Master.
Bro, when your coaches told you to get into shape, I bet you thought a circle.
Thanks for the content, besties.
You shut up. You fat.
Follow me on Twitch,
bitch.
TikTok, Instagram.
Yeah,
My name's the same as here.
I will if you exercise. How about that?
I cannot properly express with words how disgusted I am by that kind of behavior. And the worst part of it is, there are thousands of videos just like that. I have spent decades of my life seeing firsthand the impact that men make in the lives of women. And for far too long, I have unintentionally justified my lack of action on the basis that I am not that kind of man. And the truth is that good men are all around us. But for every good man that treats his spouse, his girlfriend, or his fiance as an equal with love and decency, statistically speaking, those same men have close proximity to the very people who wreak havoc in the lives of women all across the world. The abusers are your friends, your family members, your co-workers, and sometimes they are even your children. The United Nations and the WHO estimate that 736 million women have been assaulted by men in their lifetimes. And in the United States alone, over half of all women who die by homicide are the victims of their current or former partners. And this problem has only worsened over time, with the rise of incels, involuntarily celibate men who routinely use violent hate speech and actions against women.
Girls gave their affection and sex and love to other men, but never to me. I'm 22 years old and I'm still a virgin.
It's abundantly clear that we have a problem, and the problem begins in our homes. Because when young men begin to idolize the likes of Andrew Tate, it should come as no surprise that those same young men treat women as little more than an object or a belonging. Men especially have a duty to turn the tide of this nightmare that has been unleashed on our sisters, our friends, our daughters, our spouses, and our mothers. And I truly believe that all of this stems from how we teach our sons and the way that we speak to them about women, the way that we treat the women in our lives in front of them. It's the jokes we tell, the way that we demean or diminish them, the perpetual objectification of them and their bodies. And it's the perverse idea that I have heard from too many men that somehow believe a woman owes them anything at all, let alone their body, their time, or their respect. All of those things are earned. They are not owed to you. The unfortunate tragedy is that some men truly believe that because of their anecdotal experience, that because they and their male friends are decent or kind, that somehow all of this isn't true and simply doesn't apply to them. That they and their sphere of influence are the exception. And to that, I would simply say this: 736 million women would disagree with you. And until that number is zero, you being the exception is less than meaningless. Because I believe that the same hate-filled vitriol that gave Brian Laundrie the delusional justification that he needed in his sick mind to harm Gabby started in his home. When a boy learned that it was okay to demean women, when a father laughed it off, when a mother said to herself, boys will be boys, and what began as playful banter ended with a cycle of abuse that ended the life of someone who should still be here. Because Gabby could have been any one of our children, and we owe it to her and to the untold number of women like her who have been stolen from their families to fix what has been broken by us, by men, and to find it within ourselves to take responsibility and to forge a new path forward. I might not have known Gabby, but I know the way she lived. She was the kind of person bold enough to try and change the unchangeable. And if that's how we honor her life, then I want to be among those who stand up and say once and for all, the endless cycle of abuse against our daughters, our mothers, our sisters, and our friends. It ends here with us, because all of this is long overdue, and enough is enough. The story of Gabby Petito didn't begin or end with the crimes that were perpetrated against her, but it was because of her that many began to realize the importance of protecting those who need it most. Story after story of people who listened to Gabby's voice and all that she endured, seeing themselves in her eyes, seeing themselves in her suffering. Now more than ever, we understand that the death of Gabby Petito was a painful and horrific loss, a loss that never needed to happen. But while we know Gabby's story because of her death, what persists even more than the tragedy is the legacy she leaves behind. Through her, an entire lifetime of memories remain in her absence, a story hiding behind the lines of news reports, video feeds, and still frame images. And what persists through her suffering is a life filled with hope, a woman whose light remains despite the vain attempts to extinguish it. As a father, I remember the very first moments I laid eyes on my children. I will never forget the overwhelming love that I felt when I held each of them for the very first time. The realization that I would never love anyone the way that I love them. Knowing that I would go to any length to ensure their safety and their happiness. And that's the real reason why so many of us watched the news pleading with the heavens that Gabby would somehow be okay, that she would be found and that she would come home. It's why our hearts shattered with the Petito family when the news broke that hope was lost. Because in their pain, we could see ourselves and how unfathomable it would be for any of us to have lost one of our own. But despite the enormity of their suffering, the Petito family found the strength to rise above their pain, choosing instead to overcome something depraved and evil, transforming it into a legacy of love and beauty that will reach through the generations, helping to save untold number of lives, choosing to allow their anguish to become hope for others, to become a foundation that will help to save the lives of people all across the world. Gabby's life and those just like her, their stories live as a testament, a beacon of hope that stands like an immovable lighthouse amidst the storm, guiding those who are swept away by the waves of life, shining into the darkness, leading them back to safety, bringing them back home. And even now, her story reaches out into the void, pleading for those who find themselves in the same desolate spaces, those who wrongly believe that the world has forgotten them, uncertain of how to tread water on their own, giving them hope through her tragedy, while pulling them from the depths and placing them back on solid ground. Because if I learned anything from Gabby Petito's life, it's this: the suffering you may have endured in your life, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything to deserve it, because you do deserve love, happiness, joy, safety, and most of all, you deserve a life free from the harm that anyone who claims to love you has shown. And while Gabby may not be here to see the impact she's made, I believe she knows, and that her story will continue to be a beacon for the incredible life she lived, for the incredible impact that she has made, and for all the ways that she will live on, for all the ways that she will be remembered. In closing, I want to take a moment to convey my incredible gratitude to each and every person listening to the sound of my voice right now. Your time, your support, and all the ways that you have rallied behind me as a creator is something that I value more than I can properly express with words. I read each and every comment, and I see all of the ways that you show your support of this channel, and I want you to know how truly grateful I am for every moment that you have afforded me in telling just part of Gabby's story. Many years ago, I found myself trying to recover from over a decade of an abusive relationship. The physical, mental, and emotional violence took years to recover from. But it's taken me almost 15 years to find the courage and the words to talk about it. So thank you for just being here, for listening, because every word that I speak in this video is said from a place of compassion for Gabby and for every person who has ever found themselves in very similar spaces. And even if this video helps just one person, then for me, it'll have been worthwhile. So thank you for making that possible. I also want to take a moment to thank the many supporters of this channel. I do not say these words lightly, but I quite literally would not be able to do any of this if it wasn't for each and every one of you. The Patreon and YouTube membership supporters are the backbone. They are the lifeblood of this channel. And your support allows me to immerse myself into a case, into research, writing, and doing the best I can to make something that honors every victim and their families. Now, I don't pretend that I always get it right, but I do my best to listen, to learn, and to try every way that I can to respect and honor the victims. So thank you, each of you, for your support, for your kindness, and for being the amazing community of like-minded and passionate people that you are. I couldn't do any of this without you. Now, concerning future content, I have decided to make a few changes. I recognize that I can't always spend 500 or even 1,000 hours working on a video, so I'm going to focus on working on shorter form content. This may look like 20 to 30 minute videos, as well as continuing with the episodic format. So I am already working on new episodes for a number of cases that each of you have requested, including Betty Broderick, Chandler Halderson, Melissa Lucio, Colonel Russell Williams, and that's just to name a few. And as always, details for when those will be released will get posted directly to the community page. And last but certainly not least, a new episode for the podcast will get posted early next week, so stay tuned for details. And just like we always do, this has been Behind Criminal Minds. We'll see you next time.